A torrential rain battered the town of Riverside, a storm so fierce that it seemed the heavens had unleashed their full fury. Sheets of water blurred the streets, turning them into rivers, while thunder rolled ominously across the gray skies. People huddled inside their homes, watching nature's wrath unfold through fogged-up windows. But amidst this chaos, something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would forever change the lives of two people and leave an indelible mark on the town. Dr. Ethan Walker, a 42-year-old surgeon, had just finished his shift at Riverside General Hospital. His day had been grueling, as always. Double bypass surgery in the morning, a marathon consultation session in the afternoon, and an emergency appendectomy that spilled into the early evening. Tired but satisfied, he decided to take a rare moment for himself and drive to the edge of the town, where the Riverside Park offered a quiet solace. For Ethan, the rhythmic sound of the rushing river was calming, a stark contrast to the constant beeping of monitors and the sterile white walls of the hospital. The rain had already started when Ethan parked his car and stepped out. Pulling his hood tightly over his head, he walked toward the riverbank, where the water surged violently, swollen from days of rain. The wind whipped at his jacket, and a chill seeped into his bones, but he welcomed the bracing air. It was his way of shaking off the weight of the day, resetting his mind for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. As he stood there, gazing at the frothy current, he caught a flash of movement out of the corner of his eye. Turning, he saw a woman running toward the edge of the river, shouting something unintelligible against the roar of the storm. She was waving her arms frantically, her attention fixed on a small dog scrambling along the bank, dangerously close to the rushing water. The dog, a wiry little thing with matted fur, was barking and skittering nervously, seemingly unaware of the danger. Ethan's first instinct was to call out to her, to warn her of the river's strength. But before he could, she slipped. One misstep on the slick grass, and she was tumbling forward, her arms flailing. Time seemed to slow as she fell, hitting the water with a splash that was almost immediately swallowed by the roaring current. The dog barked wildly from the bank, but the woman disappeared beneath the surface. Ethan's heart slammed into his ribs. For a split second, he was frozen, his mind racing. The water was moving fast, too fast. If she didn't know how to swim, or even if she did, her chances were slim. He scanned the area for anyone else, but the park was deserted. It was just him, the river, and the storm. Without thinking further, Ethan kicked off his shoes and yanked off his jacket. Adrenaline surged through him as he sprinted toward the bank. The rain lashed against his face, and the wind howled in his ears, but he didn't hesitate. He leapt into the river, the icy water stealing his breath and shocking his system. For a moment, he struggled to orient himself, the current pulling at him with relentless force. But then he saw her, a flash of red from her coat, bobbing up and down as the river carried her downstream. Ethan swam harder than he ever had in his life. Each stroke was a battle against the current, his muscles burning and his lungs screaming for air. The rain pelted the surface of the water, creating a dizzying pattern that made it difficult to focus. He reached her just as she went under again, her hands flailing weakly above the surface. Grabbing her by the arm, he pulled her up, gasping as she choked and sputtered. "Hold on," he shouted, though he wasn't sure she could hear him over the storm. She didn't respond, her body limp except for the occasional twitch. Ethan wrapped an arm around her chest, trying to keep her head above water as he scanned for a way out. The riverbank was steep and slick, offering no easy escape. The current tugged at them relentlessly, dragging them farther from safety. Just when Ethan thought things couldn't get worse, he felt something snag against his leg. Looking down, he saw a tangle of branches and debris that had caught in the current, forming a deadly snare. His foot was caught, and he couldn't move. Panic flared in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. With his free hand, he reached down, struggling to free himself while keeping a firm grip on the woman. The debris was tangled tightly, and every second he spent struggling was another second the river tried to pull them both under. Finally, with a desperate yank, he broke free, but the effort cost him. His strength was waning, and the woman's weight felt heavier with every passing moment. His mind raced for a solution. The river was carrying them toward an overhanging tree, its gnarled branches dipping into the water like skeletal hands. It was a slim chance, but it was all he had. Kicking furiously, he guided them toward the tree, reaching out with his free hand to grab one of the branches. It was slippery and wet, but he held on with every ounce of strength he had left. Using the branch as leverage, Ethan pulled both himself and the woman toward the bank. It was agonizingly slow, his arms trembling with the effort, but inch by inch, they made progress. Finally, his feet found purchase on the muddy slope, and he dragged them both out of the water, collapsing onto the ground with a heaving gasp. The woman was unconscious, her face pale and lips blue. Ethan didn't waste a moment. Rolling her onto her back, he tilted her head and began chest compressions, counting under his breath as he pressed down on her sternum. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, don't do this." After what felt like an eternity, she coughed, water spilling from her mouth as she gasped for air. Relief flooded through Ethan, so intense that it left him dizzy. She was alive. Bruised, battered, and freezing, but alive. The dog, which had been barking incessantly from the riverbank, now ran up to them, circling and whining. Ethan managed a shaky laugh, his breath visible in the cold air. "You've got a loyal friend here," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. As the rain continued to fall, Ethan pulled off his damp shirt and draped it over the woman to provide some warmth. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling, and called for help. The emergency operator assured him that an ambulance was on its way, but it would take time to navigate the flooded streets. For now, all he could do was stay with her, keeping her awake and talking. "You're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "Just hold on a little longer." Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him with a mix of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Ethan smiled, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "You're welcome. Just don't try to save any more dogs in a storm, okay?" The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips before her eyes closed again, her breathing steady. Ethan sat back, his heart still pounding, and looked out at the river. It was as wild and untamed as ever, a reminder of just how close they had come to tragedy. But for now, at least, they were safe. Little did Ethan know, this was only the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond that stormy night. The events of that stormy evening stayed with Dr. Ethan Walker as he sat in the waiting room of Riverside General Hospital, drenched to the bone and utterly drained. The woman he had pulled from the river, whose name he had learned was Sarah Miles, was being stabilized in the emergency room. The hospital staff had taken over the moment the ambulance arrived, but the image of her pale face, lips tinged blue, and lifeless body in the water still played in his mind like a haunting reel. It was supposed to be just another day, but life had a way of throwing unexpected curveballs that tested not only his skills but his very limits as a human being. The rain hadn't let up, pounding against the hospital's windows and turning the already gray world into a blur. Ethan's soaked clothes clung to his skin as he sipped a lukewarm cup of coffee offered by a nurse. He barely noticed its taste. His thoughts were consumed by the fragility of the moment, the thin line that separated life from death. His medical training taught him to compartmentalize, to focus on the task at hand, but tonight had been different. This wasn't in the sterile, controlled environment of an operating room. This was raw, chaotic, and terrifying. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Dr. Walker, she's stable now." It was Nurse Clara, one of his trusted colleagues. She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts concern and admiration. "You saved her life. The water she inhaled was dangerous, but you got to her just in time." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. How's her condition now? She'll need close monitoring for the next 24 hours, but her vitals are improving. Once she's conscious, she'll need to be evaluated for any lasting complications, but it looks promising, Clara said. She paused, then added softly, "You're a hero, Ethan." He shook his head. "I'm no hero. I just did what anyone would do." But Clara didn't press him. Instead, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before walking away, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. As Ethan stared into his half-empty coffee cup, memories of the evening replayed in his mind. He thought about how quickly everything had unfolded, the split-second decisions he'd had to make, and the sheer desperation of fighting the river's relentless pull. He also thought about Sarah, her bravery in trying to save the dog, and the quiet determination that seemed to linger even in her unconscious state. Who was she? What had driven her to risk her life in such a dangerous moment? Ethan decided to find out. After changing into a spare set of scrubs provided by a nurse, he made his way to the recovery ward where Sarah was being treated. The halls were quiet, the usual bustle of the hospital subdued by the storm raging outside. When he entered her room, he found her lying on the bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped softly, a testament to her steady recovery. Her face, now free of the pallor that had terrified him earlier, was calm and serene, though her eyes remained closed. Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, uncertain of what he felt. Relief? Gratitude? Perhaps a strange sense of connection to this stranger whose life he had fought so hard to save. He was about to turn and leave when her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her gaze darting around the room before settling on him. "You," she murmured, her voice raspy but clear. "You're the one who pulled me out." Ethan smiled faintly. "Guilty as charged. How are you feeling?" Sarah blinked, as if testing her senses. "Like I got hit by a truck. But alive, thanks to you." Her voice cracked, and Ethan quickly grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table, helping her take a sip. "You gave us all a scare," he said, setting the cup down. "What were you thinking, going after that dog in this storm?" Her lips curved into a weak smile. "That's Max. He's a stray I've been feeding near the park for months. He's scared of everything, loud noises, people, storms. When I saw him so close to the river, I didn't think. I just acted." Ethan shook his head, a mixture of frustration and admiration bubbling up. "Well, next time, think. The river almost took both of you." Sarah's expression softened, and she looked at him intently. "Why did you do it? Jump in after me, I mean. You didn't have to." The question caught him off guard. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't think either," he admitted. "I saw you in trouble, and I couldn't just stand there. It's what I've been trained to do, save lives." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you," she said simply, the weight of her gratitude evident in her tone. Over the next few days, as Sarah recovered, Ethan found himself visiting her room more often than he'd anticipated. At first, he told himself it was professional courtesy, checking on her condition, making sure she was healing properly. But their conversations grew longer, more personal. He learned that Sarah was a teacher at the local elementary school, beloved by her students for her creative lessons and compassionate nature. She had moved to Riverside a few years ago, drawn by the small-town charm and the opportunity to make a difference in a close-knit community. Sarah, in turn, learned about Ethan's journey into medicine, his decision to leave behind the bustling chaos of city hospitals for the quieter, more personal environment of Riverside General. He spoke of the challenges of balancing his demanding career with his desire for a more meaningful connection to the people he served. It was a side of him he rarely shared, but with Sarah, the words came easily. As the days passed, word of Ethan's heroic rescue spread through the town. What had initially been a dramatic but isolated event turned into a story that captured the community's imagination. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing Ethan as a hero, much to his discomfort. Neighbors and strangers alike stopped him in the grocery store, on his way to work, even at the gas station, to thank him for his bravery. It was overwhelming, but what struck Ethan the most was how the incident seemed to bring people together. The town rallied around Sarah as well, donating supplies to help her care for Max, who had officially become her dog after being rescued from the river. Children from her school made her get well cards, and parents volunteered to help with her classes until she was fully recovered. It was as if the storm, with all its chaos and destruction, had also unearthed something beautiful, a renewed sense of community and connection. For Ethan, however, the attention felt almost surreal. He wasn't used to being the center of anyone's admiration, let alone an entire town's. In the quiet moments, he found himself reflecting on the choices he had made that night. Had it been instinct, training, or something deeper that had driven him to act? And what did it mean for his life moving forward? Sarah's recovery marked the end of her immediate ordeal, but for both her and Ethan, it was clear that this was only the beginning of a journey that would reshape their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. As Ethan left her hospital room one evening, her voice stopped him at the door. "Ethan," she said softly, her gaze steady despite the lingering fatigue in her eyes. "Do you ever think about how one moment can change everything?" He turned back, meeting her gaze. "All the time," he replied. "And I think that moment happens more often than we realize. We just don't always see it." Sarah nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I see it now." Ethan smiled back, a sense of quiet understanding passing between them. And as he walked out into the still rainy night, he couldn't shake the feeling that, for better or worse, his life, and Sarah's, had been irrevocably changed. The days following Sarah's release from the hospital were marked by an odd blend of normalcy and newfound connection for both her and Ethan. For Sarah, returning to her modest home on the edge of town brought a mix of relief and apprehension. Max, her scrappy, loyal rescue dog, had become her constant shadow. His once nervous demeanor seemed to shift overnight, and now he rarely left her side. It was as though he understood the gravity of what had happened, the near brush with death that had bonded them in a way words never could. Sarah's house was cozy but unassuming, a reflection of her simple, quiet life. Her bookshelves overflowed with children's literature and teaching manuals, and her kitchen smelled perpetually of fresh coffee and the lavender candles she loved to light in the evenings. But the storm had left its mark here, too. Her small garden had been battered, the fence partially collapsed by a fallen branch, and the gutters still overflowed with leaves. She surveyed the damage with a sigh, making a mental note to fix it when her strength returned. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan found himself grappling with a different kind of unease. The media attention from his river rescue had yet to die down. Local reporters had camped outside the hospital for days, eager to snag an interview. Patients and colleagues alike now looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. It should have been flattering, even gratifying, but Ethan felt more exposed than ever. He was used to the controlled chaos of the operating room, where his work spoke for itself. This public hero narrative was entirely out of his comfort zone. But it wasn't just the attention that unsettled him. It was Sarah. Since their shared ordeal, she occupied a space in his thoughts that felt oddly permanent. Their conversations at the hospital had sparked something, an understanding, a shared sense of having faced something extraordinary together. And now that she was home, he felt a pull to check on her, to ensure she was truly okay. It started with a simple text. "How's the recovery going? Need anything?" Her reply came quickly, "Doing better every day. Max says thanks for saving his mom." Smiling face with smiling eyes. Ethan chuckled at the message, the weight of his day momentarily lifting. He found himself texting her more often, updates on how the hospital was faring, recommendations for good physical therapy exercises, and occasionally, light-hearted jokes to brighten her mood. Their exchanges became a regular part of his day, a bright thread woven through the fabric of his demanding schedule. But it wasn't until a week later that he decided to visit. The storm had left the town in disarray, and many residents were still cleaning up the damage. Ethan figured Sarah could use a hand, even if she was too proud to ask for help. He packed his truck with some tools, a bag of groceries, and a warm blanket he'd picked up for Max, then headed to her house on a rare sunny afternoon. Sarah opened the door, surprised but pleased to see him. She was dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a worn sweatshirt, and her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked healthier, the color returned to her cheeks, though there was still a hint of fragility in her frame. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said, though her smile betrayed her gratitude. "You didn't have to jump into a river for a dog," he shot back, grinning. "But here we are." She laughed softly, stepping aside to let him in. Max trotted up to Ethan immediately, sniffing at the blanket in his hand before wagging his tail enthusiastically. Ethan knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears. "I figured he deserved a little treat," he said, handing Sarah the blanket. She accepted it with a smile. "You're spoiling him already." "Thank you." They spent the afternoon working side by side. Ethan repaired the damaged fence while Sarah cleaned up the debris in the garden. The sun warmed the earth, and the sound of their laughter filled the air as they exchanged stories. Ethan shared tales from his medical career, some humorous, others heart-wrenching, while Sarah recounted amusing anecdotes from her classroom, painting vivid pictures of the kids who both challenged and inspired her daily. At one point, Ethan paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're tougher than you look," he remarked, watching her wrestle with a stubborn root. Sarah glanced up, grinning. "Comes with the job. You try wrangling 25 8-year-olds every day and see how tough you get." He laughed, shaking his head. "I think I'll stick to surgery." As the afternoon gave way to evening, Sarah insisted on cooking dinner as a thank you. They settled into her small kitchen, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air as she prepared a simple pasta dish. Max lounged nearby, occasionally perking up at the sound of a pot clattering or a knife chopping. Over dinner, their conversation grew more personal. Sarah spoke of her move to Riverside, her reasons for leaving behind a life in the city, and the challenges she'd faced in building a new life in a small town. Ethan listened intently, struck by her resilience and the quiet strength that underpinned her words. In turn, he opened up about his own struggles, his decision to leave a prestigious hospital position in Chicago, the burnout that had driven him to seek a quieter, more meaningful existence. He spoke of the patients who had left a lasting impact on him, the ones whose stories he carried like invisible scars. By the time they finished eating, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the room. Sarah cleared the dishes, insisting Ethan relax after his hard work. But as she washed up, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder," she began, her voice soft, "why things happen the way they do? Like, why that storm had to happen, why Max ran to the river, why you were there at that exact moment?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "Sometimes life feels random, like a series of disconnected events. But then something happens, something big, like that night, and it's hard not to see it as, I don't know, meaningful. Like everything was leading to that moment." Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "It's strange, isn't it? How one moment can change so much." "It is," he agreed. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe those moments are what make everything else worthwhile." For a long time, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them like an unspoken bond. Outside, the stars began to emerge, their light faint but unwavering against the vast expanse of the night sky. As Ethan left that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that his visit had been more than just a casual gesture of goodwill. There was something about Sarah, her resilience, her kindness, the quiet determination in her eyes, that drew him in. And though he didn't fully understand it yet, he knew one thing for certain: the night of the storm had been the start of something much bigger than either of them realized. For Sarah, the visit was a reminder that even in the aftermath of chaos, there could be moments of connection, healing, and hope. And as she watched Ethan's truck disappear down the road, Max curled up beside her, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of possibility. In the weeks that followed Ethan's visit, life in Riverside began to settle into its usual rhythm, though for Sarah and Ethan, something had undeniably shifted. Sarah returned to her classroom, greeted with cheers and hugs from her students, who had decorated the room with handmade banners that read, "Welcome back, Ms. Miles." Her colleagues and parents of her students stopped her in the halls to express their relief and admiration for her bravery. Max, now a permanent fixture in her life, became a local celebrity of sorts. Parents brought him treats during school drop-offs, and kids clamored for his attention when Sarah occasionally brought him to class. Despite the outward appearance of normalcy, Sarah couldn't shake the lingering impact of the storm. She found herself pausing in quiet moments, reflecting on how close she had come to losing everything. It wasn't fear she felt, it was a profound sense of gratitude, not just for her survival but for the people who had rallied around her in the aftermath, especially Ethan. Their growing friendship had become a lifeline in a way she hadn't anticipated. They texted almost daily, their conversations ranging from light-hearted banter to deeper, more introspective exchanges. Yet, as much as Sarah appreciated their connection, she couldn't help but wonder if there was something more between them, something unspoken. Ethan, for his part, had thrown himself back into work, but even the busiest days couldn't distract him entirely from Sarah. He thought about her often, her laughter, her resilience, the way she had faced her challenges with quiet strength. He admired her, and that admiration was beginning to feel like something more. Still, he hesitated to act on it, unsure if his feelings were reciprocated or if the intensity of their shared experience had simply blurred the lines of friendship. The turning point came on an unremarkable Friday evening. The storm had long passed, but a new kind of buzz swept through the town. The annual Riverside Autumn Festival was in full swing, a cherished tradition that brought together families, friends, and neighbors for a weekend of food, music, and festivities. The festival was held in the town square, its cobblestone streets lined with vendor stalls selling everything from handmade crafts to baked goods. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed above, casting a warm glow as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sarah hadn't planned on attending. The festival was usually a joyful occasion, but the thought of navigating the bustling crowds felt daunting after the emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks. It was Max, however, who changed her mind. When she mentioned the festival in passing, his ears perked up as if he understood, and the image of him happily exploring the square was enough to convince her. She grabbed his leash, donned a cozy sweater, and headed out. The festival was as lively as she remembered, the air filled with the scent of caramel apples and freshly grilled sausages. Children ran past, clutching balloons, while local musicians played upbeat tunes on a makeshift stage. Sarah wandered through the stalls, greeting familiar faces and allowing Max to sniff his way through the crowd. Despite her initial hesitation, she felt a warmth settle over her, a reminder of the community that had embraced her so fully. Ethan, too, had found himself at the festival, though he hadn't planned it either. One of his colleagues had convinced him to take a break from work, and he had reluctantly agreed. Now, as he walked through the square, he couldn't help but enjoy the festive atmosphere. He stopped at a booth selling hand-carved wooden figurines, chatting with the craftsman about the intricacies of his work. But his mind wandered, as it often did these days, to Sarah. And then, as if summoned by his thoughts, he saw her. She was standing near a stall selling homemade candles, her hair illuminated by the soft glow of the festival lights. Max sat obediently by her side, his tail wagging as a child reached out to pet him. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his heart skipping a beat, before making his way over. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his voice light but tinged with genuine surprise. Sarah turned, her expression shifting from surprise to delight. "Ethan. I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he replied. "I thought you might still be avoiding crowds." "I was," she admitted, smiling. But Max had other plans. The two of them fell into an easy rhythm, strolling through the festival together. They sampled caramel popcorn from one stall, admired the intricate quilts displayed at another, and laughed as Max tried to chase a bubble blown by a street performer. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence that felt as natural as their shared laughter. As the evening wore on, they found themselves near the edge of the square, where the crowd thinned, and the noise softened. A small bonfire crackled nearby, surrounded by benches where festival-goers gathered to roast marshmallows. Ethan gestured toward an empty bench, and they sat down, the warmth of the fire cutting through the crisp autumn air. "Do you come to this every year?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. "Usually," Sarah said, leaning back against the bench. "It's one of my favorite parts of living here. There's something comforting about traditions, you know? Even when everything else feels uncertain." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "I get that. It's part of why I moved here. I wanted something steady, something that felt real." Sarah glanced at him, her expression softening. "Do you feel like you found it?" Ethan hesitated, his thoughts tangling as he searched for the right words. "I think I'm starting to," he said finally, his voice quiet. "This place, the people here, it's different. It feels like home in a way I didn't expect." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The unspoken tension that had been building between them hung in the air, heavy but not unwelcome. Sarah broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, do you ever think about that night? The storm, the river, everything?" "All the time," he admitted. "It changed everything, for both of us, I think." Sarah nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It did. And I keep thinking about what you said, how moments like that can make everything else worthwhile. I think this is one of those moments." Ethan's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It is," he said, his voice steady. "And I think maybe there's a reason we both ended up there that night." Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting his. For the first time since the storm, she felt a sense of clarity, a quiet certainty that had eluded her until now. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, and he responded without hesitation, taking her hand in his own. The rest of the festival faded away, the noise, the lights, the crowd. In that moment it was just the two of them, bound by a shared experience that had transformed them both. And as they sat by the fire, their hands intertwined, they both realized that the storm, with all its chaos and destruction, had brought them to this place, a place of connection, healing, and hope. The days after the festival seemed brighter for both Sarah and Ethan, as if the bond they had acknowledged by the fire had illuminated their lives in new ways. For Sarah, the weight she had carried since the storm seemed lighter. The students in her classroom noticed her renewed energy, and Max's wagging tail greeted everyone who visited her house, a reflection of the newfound peace she had begun to embrace. Ethan, too, found a spring in his step that his colleagues couldn't ignore. The once reserved surgeon seemed more open, more willing to linger in conversations and share a laugh in the break room. The change wasn't lost on anyone, though few dared to ask him about it directly. Ethan didn't mind, he wasn't the type to make grand declarations. Instead, he poured his newfound joy into his work and his deepening connection with Sarah. Their friendship evolved effortlessly into something more. Ethan found himself stopping by Sarah's house regularly, sometimes with a casserole in hand, other times with nothing more than an easy excuse to see her. Max had taken to Ethan in a way that felt almost uncanny, as if the dog had decided that this man, too, was family. They spent evenings talking late into the night, their conversations ranging from mundane topics like favorite foods to deeper. Finding herself startled by loud noises or unsettled during heavy rains. Ethan, too, faced his own battles, grappling with the pressure of his work and the expectations that came with being a surgeon. Yet, through it all, they leaned on each other, their bond a source of strength that carried them through the difficult days. One particularly stormy evening, as rain lashed against the windows of Sarah's house, she found herself pacing the living room, her anxiety bubbling to the surface. Max lay at her feet, his ears twitching at every rumble of thunder. Ethan, who had come over to keep her company, watched her quietly for a moment before standing and taking her hand. "Come here," he said gently, leading her to the couch. He sat down and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "It's just a storm, Sarah. It's not the same." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But it feels the same. It's like I'm back there, fighting to keep my head above water." Ethan tightened his hold on her, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're not alone this time. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." His words, simple but powerful, grounded her. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean into him, to let his presence anchor her. And as the storm raged outside, she realized that while she couldn't control the weather, she could choose how to face it. With Ethan by her side, she felt braver, stronger, more capable of weathering whatever came her way. Their relationship became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even the most difficult circumstances could lead to something beautiful. Together, they began to dream of a future that was as steady and grounding as it was full of adventure. And as the seasons changed, they found themselves building a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a reflection of the journey that had brought them together. Winter descended on Riverside with its usual quiet beauty. The town, now blanketed in soft white snow, seemed to glow under the holiday lights strung along the main street. The storm that had forever altered Sarah and Ethan's lives was months behind them, yet its effects rippled outward, shaping not only their bond but the very fabric of the community. As the year came to a close, Riverside prepared for its annual Winter Gala, a cherished tradition where the townsfolk gathered to celebrate the season and reflect on the year gone by. This year, however, the gala carried a deeper significance. The storm and its aftermath had united the community in ways no one could have anticipated. The gala would also serve as a fundraiser to rebuild the few structures still damaged by the storm, ensuring that Riverside emerged stronger than ever. Sarah was on the planning committee, and while she loved contributing to the event, it had been a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and endless decorations. Her living room was a chaotic mess of ribbons, candles, and centerpieces as she worked late into the evenings, determined to make the gala a night to remember. Max, as always, was her faithful companion, his head resting on her lap as she tied bows and wrote out place cards. Ethan had offered to help, but his long hours at the hospital made it difficult for him to contribute as much as he wanted. On the night of the gala, the community center was transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights adorned every surface, and tables were set with silver and blue accents that shimmered like frost. The air buzzed with excitement as families, couples, and friends arrived in their finest attire, their laughter and chatter filling the space. A small stage was set up in the corner, where local musicians played soft melodies that added to the magic of the evening. Sarah arrived early to oversee the final details, her breath catching when she saw the completed setup. It was everything she had hoped for, a beautiful celebration of the town's resilience and unity. She wore a deep green gown that complemented her auburn hair, and as she moved through the crowd, she received countless compliments not only on her appearance but on the work she had done to bring the event to life. Ethan arrived later, his eyes immediately scanning the room for Sarah. When he spotted her, his heart skipped a beat. She was radiant, her smile lighting up the room in a way that even the hundreds of twinkling lights couldn't match. He approached her, his confidence wavering slightly as he wondered if she had any idea just how much she meant to him. "You've outdone yourself," he said as he reached her, his voice warm and sincere. "This place looks incredible." Sarah turned, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Ethan. You made it." Her smile softened as she took in his appearance. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, and she couldn't help but notice how well it suited him. "And you clean up nicely." They laughed, the moment as easy and natural as every other they had shared. Ethan offered her his arm, and together they moved through the crowd, greeting friends and neighbors. As the night wore on, the speeches began. The mayor took to the stage, delivering a heartfelt address about the challenges the town had faced and the strength it had shown in overcoming them. He thanked Sarah specifically for her efforts during the storm and in organizing the gala, prompting a round of applause that brought tears to her eyes. Ethan watched her from the edge of the room, his chest swelling with pride. It was in moments like these that he realized how deeply he cared for her, not just as someone who had saved her dog or as a friend, but as the woman who had transformed his life. He knew then that he couldn't wait any longer to tell her how he felt. After the speeches ended, the music picked up, and couples began to fill the dance floor. Ethan made his way to Sarah, who was standing near the refreshment table, chatting with a group of parents from her school. She looked up as he approached, her smile widening. "Care to dance?" he asked, extending a hand. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I'd love to." They made their way to the dance floor, the world around them fading as they moved in time with the music. Ethan held her close, his hand resting lightly on her back, and Sarah felt her heart race at the nearness of him. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to let the moment carry them. Finally, Ethan broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to say." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his nerves momentarily threatening to get the better of him. But then he remembered everything they had been through together, the storm, the recovery, the quiet nights spent talking on her porch. "I care about you," he said, his voice unwavering. "More than I've ever cared about anyone. I know we've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know how I feel. You mean the world to me, Sarah." Her breath caught, her heart pounding as his words sank in. She had suspected his feelings, had even dared to hope, but hearing them spoken aloud was something else entirely. Tears welled in her eyes, and she smiled, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Ethan, you've been my rock through all of this. I don't know where I'd be without you. And I feel the same way. I think I've felt this way for a while now." Relief and joy washed over Ethan's face, and he leaned down, his forehead touching hers. For a moment, they simply stood there, wrapped in the music and the warmth of each other's presence. And then, as if by instinct, he tilted his head and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her lips. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and they broke apart, laughing as they realized the entire town had been watching them. But neither of them cared. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had supported them through their darkest days, they knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. As the night wore on, Sarah and Ethan stayed close, their hands intertwined as they moved through the festivities. The gala raised more than enough funds for the rebuilding efforts, but it did something even more important: it reminded everyone of the power of community, love, and resilience. When the night finally came to an end, Ethan walked Sarah home, Max trotting happily beside them. They stood on her porch, the cold winter air nipping at their cheeks, and Ethan pulled her into a hug. "This feels like the beginning of something incredible," he said softly. Sarah smiled, her head resting against his chest. "It does. And I can't wait to see where it takes us." As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, they stood there, holding each other, knowing that no matter what storms the future might bring, they would face them together.